Going back quickly though, you mentioned the words 423, and I wonder if you could maybe expand as to why that time is important to you.
Well, 4:23 in the morning is when began having this conversation, this on paper dialogue.
Yes.
And it seemed that whenever I approached that time of night, 4:23, between 4:15 and 4:30 in the morning, I would be awakened with the urge, with the impulse to continue having this ongoing conversation. So after a while, I began wondering, what I don't understand why during that particular time, what's so special about that time period between 4:15 and 4:30 in the morning? I opened up the birth certificate. I just out of curiosity, I just wanted to see what it said. It said time of birth, 4:23 a.m.
What would you do if I said that I could talk to God? Would you believe me? Would I be speaking blasphemy? Would I be full of BS? Would it be a mixture of all the above? Now, these aren't things that I'm claiming I've done or can do, or will do for that matter of fact. But this is something that our next guest says is absolutely possible, and it's something that he has done numerous amounts of times. He's not only done this a numerous amount of times, he's written books about these conversations that have sold millions of copies, 39 books in fact, that have been translated into 37 languages. Now, at first, back in 2016 when I first heard of this, I just thought it was nonsense. Straight off the bat. I was a devout atheist, I was a Richard Dawkins fanboy, but I was living in a Buddhist temple at the time, and so I was open to the idea of more spiritual aspects. And for some reason, there was this book that kept being banded around just by people, by friends. And weirdly, again, I think it's just a coincidence, but I was reading into a lot of things at the time. And this book, Conversations with God, by Neale Donald Walsch, just kept coming up. So I thought, okay, I'll give it a read. I'll just see what it is, because it seemed like a massive claim and what's going on. And as I started to read this book, I became hooked. When it comes to the spiritual aspects or the philosophical aspects of life, this has probably been the most profound book I've ever read. Now, between you and I'm not even sure if this man is speaking to God, but at this point, I don't care. Because to this day, almost 8 years later now, it is still the most beautiful, the most delicious philosophy, and the greatest ideal of God that I've ever come across. Not only that, but speaking personally, it essentially healed the relationship between my mother and I. So my mother and I hadn't been on good terms for several years, and she kept hearing me speak about this book over several years. And then one day she said, you know what, I might just see what this weird child of mine is speaking about. And she started reading it, and the exact same thing occurred to her. Again, it seemed too good to be true. And Neale speaks about this in the interview. And it allowed us to just become so much closer together because she kind of got it. It kind of entered her into the idea of spirituality, into this new sense of compassion, into this idea of oneness. Neale's message isn't necessarily the first time that these ideas have been spread. For example, there's books like Course of Miracles, which are also very similar to some of the ideas that Neale speaks about in these books. But it is by far the most digestible version of this that I have ever come across. I think a 12-year-old could understand these concepts and again be blown away by them. So this was a conversation I wanted to have for so many years. And to be able to then have this was completely surreal. And at some point, I think within this episode, I'm just, as a man who doesn't pray, I am praying that it has at least half the effect on the listeners as it did on me, being able to speak and hear directly from Neale about his experience. So whether or not you believe it's possible to speak with God, whether or not you believe God is real, whether or not you believe that there's a different philosophy out there, I'd certainly recommend listening to this. It could just be the absolute game changer, and who knows, it might be the catalyst for healing a relationship with yourself or with someone else around you. So I asked Neale some questions I'd been wanting to ask ever since I read the book. But I must say, once I started, I became hooked. I'd almost go so far to say that I think I was halfway through reading the second book, and I had to pick my girlfriend up at the time she was traveling. I think she'd been traveling for 7 weeks. And really, I should have been wanting to spend all my time with her the day that I picked her up. But all I wanted to do was read the next page. It was extraordinary. So in this wonderful dialogue that I get to have with Neil, we get to speak about some of the aspects from his main Conversations with God books. We also get to speak about new concepts about the book that he's just launched called God Talk, which is the idea that Neil is in no way special or unique in his idea to be able to have conversations with God. This is something that we supposedly can all do. I hope you enjoy this half as much as I did. Like I said, whether you believe in God or not, this is a conversation worth listening to, because as he says, when I challenge him and say, for all those people who doubt you, for all those people that that want more evidence, what would you say to them? His answer is just excellent. So I hope you enjoy it. Anyway, I'll quit my rambling. Let's get stuck in.
I'm here with Neil Donald Walsh. Neil, thank you ever so much for coming on my wonderful tiny little podcast.
It's lovely to be here with you, Scott. How may I be of service?
To help spread the word of the Almighty would be just a little wonderful little nugget that you could impart with us for the next 55 minutes would be extraordinary.
I'd be happy to do whatever serves the moment, Scott.
Amazing. So just to give some context for people, Neil, you've obviously been a big impact over my life for the last 7 years now. But for people who are just hearing the words Neil Donald Walsh for the first time, could you give maybe a little bit of a backstory as to maybe how we're having, I suppose, this conversation, the journey you've been on?
Well, I'd be happy to, Scott. I was living a normal life like most of us, having my usual ups and downs, some very lovely events in my life, but also a few struggles. And at one point in my life, Scott, the struggles began to mount up to the point where I didn't understand why all this was happening. One thing after another, one thing after another. And so I finally sat down at... Actually, it was 4:20 in the morning. I woke up out of a dead sleep, but with a lot of anger, in my heart. I was angry about life, and I was angry with God. I guess. I mean, I had a thought that there was such a thing as God in the world, in the universe, but I didn't know how to deal with that. But now I'm really angry about how things are going in my life. So I went out to the couch. It's 4:23 in the morning, and I picked up a yellow legal pad that happened to be on the coffee table out there, and I began writing a very angry letter to I don't know, to the universe, to God. I was just trying to get some feelings out. So I wrote a letter. What does it take to make life work? What have I done to deserve a life of such continuing struggle? And I can recall writing the following words: "Tell me the rules. I'll play these silly games. Just tell me the rules."
Yeah.
And Scott, I heard a voice as clearly as I'm hearing your voice here now. And the voice said to me, "Neil, do you really want answers to all of these questions? Or are you just venting?" And my mind said, "You think I am venting? But if you have answers, I'd sure as hell like to know what they are." And then the voice said to me, "You are sure as hell, Neil, about a lot of things. But wouldn't you rather be sure as heaven?" And I'm thinking, oh, all right, what's that supposed to mean? And I wrote that down. And before I knew it, I was involved in an on-paper, what could I call it, dialogue. Question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. I was really having a dialogue with this voice that was in my mind. But it was saying things, Scott, that I never dreamt of saying. It was telling me things that I never heard of anywhere else. I never read any other place. It was bringing me information that in some cases shocked me, and in some cases brought me great joy and insight. But it was never uninteresting, so I kept on with the dialogue, back and forth, not for a few minutes, but for several hours. This went on for, as I remember, 5 or 6 hours from 4:30 in the morning until like 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning, until I had pages and pages and pages on this yellow legal pad. And actually, I had to run out. It had become daylight then. I ran out to the drugstore and got a couple more yellow legal pads because I wanted to continue what I now began to call it, the conversation that I was having. But I never thought, Scott, I never dreamt in a million gazillion years that anyone else would ever see this exchange that I was having with this voice in my mind. It didn't occur to me that anyone, even my closest people to me, people who were very close to me, I would never show them this. Because I would feel that they might think I'd lost it completely. So it was a very private, sacred experience that I was having. It was healing me, making me feel much better about life and about, all that's going on. But I never thought anyone else would ever see it. And then I was told in the conversation, Neil, you will make of this one day a book, and it will be accessed by many people. And I thought to myself, oh, now I got you. No, nobody's going to turn this into a book, or nobody's going to publish. I mean, I could just imagine a publisher getting this material and racing out to the workroom floor, saying to his editors, hold the presses, stop everything. I got a guy here who's talking to God. It's not going to happen. So I did send it to a couple of small publishing houses just to see what would occur. The rest is publishing history.
Absolutely.
One of those small publishing houses actually put the book out. I couldn't believe it when they actually agreed to put the book out. And I thought, wow, you got to be kidding me. But no, they published it. And I thought, it's not going to sell 500 copies. Nobody's going to buy a book by a guy who claims to be talking to God. But they put the book out, and I was right. It did not sell 500 copies. Sold 5 million.
Yeah.
In 37 languages. And I'm watching this like, what? And then I realized, I don't want to sound arrogant, but honestly, I felt that, these messages were not meant just for me. They were meant to touch people all over the world. And the book has been published, as I mentioned, in 37 languages all over the planet.
Yeah.
So you're one of millions of people who have shared with me that the experience apparently touched your life is in the same positive way that it touched my life.
Yes.
So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Yeah. Well, it's worked so far, Neil. So a little bit of advice, keep with it. Might turn into something one day.
Yes, you never know.
And I remember first reading it back in 2016, the first of what's going to be many dialogues, and I know there's a new book coming out which we can discuss shortly. And I remember being very skeptical at first and being very on the fence. And the reason I was reading it was it had been recommended to me by a friend of mine he must have been maybe 65 at the time, and was a doctor who left conventional medicine and started practicing more holistically, and had this wonderful insight and said, "Hey, Scott, you might enjoy it." And then someone else mentioned it as well. I thought, okay, why not? Read a couple of pages and we'll see what happens. And I started reading it and I thought, okay, there's some interesting points here. And I kept reading and I thought, okay, it's pretty good. And then I kept reading it, and I was supposed to be picking up a partner up from the train station at the time. And the entire time when we got home, I said, I need to keep finishing these pages. And I ended up reading the first book, the second book, the third book. And then I think it was a year or so, and then end up reading the fourth book. You may have noticed that the name of this podcast is Awaken the Alchemist, and it was inspired by the title of the fourth book, Awaken the Species. And there's a wonderful line in it, which is, I don't know, I'm going to absolutely butcher it, but it was the idea of, is this not the most delicious philosophy, if nothing else? And it's been wonderful, and it got to the point where I know one of my my mum decided to say, Scott keeps going on about this book and saying it's been a bit of a game changer for him. And he used to be a devout atheist that was basically had a PhD in Richard Dawkins. I'll read it and I'll see what he's talking about. And slowly she started reading it and thought, okay, the guy's got some points here. And before she knew it, she said that there's something in here, and it seems to have resonated with a huge amount of people. Um, Going back quickly though, you mentioned the words 423, and I wonder if you could maybe expand as to why that time is important to you.
Well, 4:23 in the morning is when began having this conversation, this on paper dialogue.
Yes.
And it seemed that whenever I approached that time of night, 4:23, between 4:15 and 4:30 in the morning, I would be awakened with the urge, with the impulse to continue having this ongoing conversation. So after a while, I began wondering, what I don't understand why during that particular time, what's so special about that time period between 4:15 and 4:30 in the morning? And then for another totally different reason, I was applying for a passport, and I had to. They in the United States they require your birth certificate to get a passport. So, and I didn't have my birth certificate. Who still has their birth certificate from 60 or 50 or 60 years ago? So I didn't have my birth certificate, right in the desk drawer. So I had to write to the county. I did remember at least the county where I was born. So I wrote to the county and I asked, and I got information on the internet about how to get a birth certificate. They wanted like I think $13 or something to get, and I sent them their money and they sent me the birth certificate. Scott, when I opened up the birth certificate, I just out of curiosity, I just wanted to see what it said. It said time of birth, 4:23 a.m.
Yeah.
And I
That's
thought,
extraordinary.
oh my gosh, this is really, really getting very, very unusual and very, I want to use the word strange. It's very, how can these coincidences keep on happening? I don't understand. But I realized that there was something very special going on here. But that's why 4:23 in the morning, was so significant to me. I didn't realize even in my own life that it was significant until I got that birth certificate, months later.
Yes. And so you've had this extraordinary, well, uncommon dialogue that turns out to be much more common than you ever imagined, with God. And I think you've written 39 books, and now you've got a 40th book coming out called God Talk. And so I'm wondering, and I'm sure other people are as well, what makes this book different from the 39 prior?
Well, first of all, the other 39 books were not all dialogue books. Only 9 of them were actual dialogues.
Okay.
Then the other 30 books were extrapolations, if you please, or expansions on the material, trying to respond to questions that people had been asking me through the years. So, but this book called God Talk is different from all of them because it explains really for the first time something that I've been asked about many, many times over the past 30 years. Scott, when an author has a book that they think that the people might want to read, generally they write the book and then they send it to an agent or a publisher to see if anybody wants to publish it. And that's how it was with my books. But in this case, for the first time in my life, my phone rang and a publisher called me. That's never happened in my life.
Right.
A publisher called me up. If they found my telephone number someplace, and they called me up and they said, would you be willing to write a book? We would like you to answer the question, is it possible for anybody to have the same kind of experience that you've had, a conversation with God? And I said, well, of course I believe that it is. And the whole point of the book is that everyone is having a conversation with God all the time. We're simply calling it something else. We call it women's intuition, or an epiphany, or a sudden insight or an incredible, brilliant idea that dawned on us in the middle of a shower, or whatever. And so we give it another name because we don't want people to think that we're out of our mind. So we don't walk around saying, "Yeah, God told me this, this morning." But we're all having that experience. We're simply, as I said, calling it something else. So I said to the publisher, I'd be happy to write that book. So I wrote a book that we decided we would title God Talk. And the book explores how people can each have their own conversation with God. And the process by which I came to that experience, and some hints that people may find useful as they find their own way to having that two-way interaction with the divine.
Yes.
I really sincerely believe, Scott, that there is a being called God, a higher power, if you please.
Yes.
I'm not the only one, by the way, who believes that. Surveys have been taken in most of the countries of the world. In the past 15 years, sociologists actually went around from country to country and asked a one question survey: do you believe in a higher power? And the statistics came back when the answers were tabulated. 80.5%, 8 out of 10 people said yes, they believe in some sort of higher power. We may not all agree on what that is or what it wants or how it works or what are the dogmas, what are the doctrines, but we all agree, at least 85% of us agree, that there is there's more going on here, Scott, than meets the eye.
Yes.
Or as one of your countrymen might have said a few years ago, my friend Bill said a few years ago, there are more things in heaven and earth ratio than are dreamt of in your philosophy.
Classic Bill, yeah. and so even with that, how you mentioned the idea that sometimes it might be intuition or it might be something else and people don't refer to it as God. And yet at the same time there are times where people would say that they've received heinous messages and it's good to take these terrible, I know there's no such thing as good and bad, but actions that don't seem very godlike in the name of God. And so how can people tell the difference between a mere coincidence or this communion with the divine versus potentially something else or something maybe a little bit darker?
Well, the God of my understanding, I don't claim to be the world's authority on this topic, but the God of my understanding would never, ever, ever send a message to anyone that could hurt, damage, injure, or harm a fellow human being, or for that matter, any life form. You wouldn't even get a message that could harm an animal, or that could do something to an animal that the animal didn't willfully allow to be done, or to a tree or to a plant. Is it okay to pick the vegetables out of your garden? Aren't you ending the vegetable's life when you pick the vegetable out of the ground? Or is it possible that the vegetable, a life form, has embedded in it a code that allows it to grow to a certain point and then, in fact, to end its life, if you please, in that form in order to nourish others? So
Yes.
the experience that I have had is that God would never send any sentient being a message that did not nourish others, and no message that could harm or damage or work against the will of another human being.
Yes.
So if I get one of those strange thoughts, which I don't, by the way, but if I did ever get a thought that would suggest that I somehow do something that could injure another human being or make them do something against their will, I just reject it. I would reject it because I would understand that, no, the God of my understanding is a God of pure love, and she would never send me such a message.
Yes. You mentioned the idea about eating vegetables and it containing code. I know that the book doesn't go into huge detail on talking about diet, but there is an element of eating plants and not animals. Has there ever been any circumstances where you think it would be appropriate, or where you ever got the inkling that that's something that's okay for certain people, or something that some people maybe need to be able to increase their health?
Yes, I don't believe that the dialogue says never to eat a form of life that we call an animal. I don't think that it says that. I think it says all things in moderation.
Mm.
But that doesn't mean that, if once or twice a month or whatever you happen to have a piece of, meat, red meat that it's somehow not okay or could create bad health. But if you're eating tons and tons and tons of a certain kind of food, whatever it might be, could be sugar for that matter, not just necessarily protein in the form of animal meat. But so we have to, we have to watch what we're intaking, what we're drinking, what we're eating, but it's been my observation that animals that are used to supply nourishment for other living beings have in fact been encoded with a program that causes them to do so. In other words, that's their purpose.
Yes.
That's their encoded purpose. And so we're not really doing something against the will of that life form, but in fact, we are doing something that falls into category of a willful demonstration.
Yes.
Of goodness.
That makes sense. I completely understand that. And I must say that in God Talk, it was nice to be able to see. The reason I said uncommon dialogue that turned out to be common is it's something that you reference at the beginning of God Talk, where there's a whole section dedicated to sharing multiple stories that other people, where they've had their own experience with the divine. I didn't know if it's maybe a big ask to ask you to try and remember one of those stories off the top of your head, but if you feel comfortable sharing one of those stories, that'd be amazing.
Well, I don't share those stories because I don't want anyone to think that one story is somehow more special, or more important than another. But the publisher put those stories in the book. They called me and said, "We have an idea. We'd like to go out onto the internet and invite people. Just put a notice on the internet. If you feel that you've had an interaction or an intervention from the divine, send us your story." And they told me that they received hundreds from stories from people telling them how they feel that God intervened in their life. So they picked out 6 or 7 of those stories and put them in the book, in what they called section 2 of a 3-section book called God Talk. And they did it deliberately because they wanted people to know. And it's not just this one guy in the state of Oregon in the United States who had a conversation with God. This is happening to people all over the world all the time. And here are some examples. So they put those stories in the book precisely to eliminate any possibility that anyone would be tempted to think that I'm the chosen one.
And even going back to the first time that you had this uncommon dialogue that then later became much more common for people around the world, at what point did you start to realize, I don't think this is me. This isn't one part of my brain talking to another part. This does feel like, dare I say it, God.
Very early in the conversation, Scott, because I began to receive messages that were contradictory to everything I had been told as a younger person about life and about God. For instance, I remember I got the message, "Neil, there's no such thing as right and wrong." I remember I got the message, "Neil, there are no victims and no villains in the world." And then the most startling of the early messages that I received was when I received the following message: "There's no such thing as the 10 Commandments. You made it all up. Because we are all one." God said to me, "Neil, we are all one. You are simply an individuation of the divine. You are a part of me. And all sentient beings in the cosmos are part of that which I am. So who would I command? And who would I punish, by the way, if the commandments were not kept? Would the right hand slap the left? Because we are all one." So God made it very clear to me. you made the whole story up. The story about commandments, the story about punishment, the story about everlasting damnation. You made all of that up because you didn't cause yourself to live your life in the image and likeness of God. You thought that God should be created in the image and likeness of you.
Mm.
You created God in the way that you live your life. But that's not how the Supreme Being functions. God does not punish, condemn, judge other people or any other life form for a very good reason, Scott. Because God cannot be hurt, damaged, injured, harmed, disappointed, or angered in any way.
Mm.
For also a very good reason. Because there is nothing that God needs from any of us, any more than we would need something from a 15-month-old baby.
Mm.
You know, what do you don't need the baby to act in a certain way in order to love that child. You love that child simply for the beauty and the wonder and the glory of who they are, lying there in the crib. We don't say, well, unless you cry the way I want you to cry, or unless you smile the way I want you to smile, I'll teach you a lesson. Because we don't need anything from that beautiful life form. We don't need anything from that. We simply appreciate and love that beauty and the exquisite life form in front of us, which is how God loves us. God loves us the way we love our own tiny children, because we are God's tiny children. I could, of course, be wrong about all of this. I don't think so.
It's do you feel like that was the biggest shocker to your conventional theology? Or was there another part that really stood out to you as, okay, this is the biggest difference in belief systems that I've ever had?
Well, yeah, yes, I think the very first statement that was made in the book, in what became the book, it was in the very first statement in my dialogue, which I've already shared with you, Scott, but that was the most important, shocking statement. We are all one. She said,
Yeah.
Neil, all things are one thing. There is only one thing, and all things are part of the one thing there is. And that changed everything in my life.
Yeah.
And then the second statement that really changed my life, that was hugely important to me, was when I said to God, okay, I get it, but how do I make life work? How do I make all of this, work in my life? It sounds wonderful on paper, but how to make it functional?
Mm.
And God said, sweetheart, it's so simple. Your life is not about you. Your life has nothing to do with you. I know you think that your life is all about you, but your life has nothing to do with you. Your life is about everyone whose life you touch and the way in which you touch it. But when you experience life in that way, you realize that in the largest sense, fair enough. In the universal sense, your life is about you because, Neil, there's only one of us in the room.
Hmm.
So obviously what you do for another, you do for yourself. And what you fail to do for another, you fail to do for yourself. And what you do to another, you do to yourself. So it is very much as if somebody told us around 2000 or so years ago. We just celebrated his birthday here a couple of days ago. And he said, do unto others as you would have it done unto you. And what he didn't add was, because it will be done unto you. Because there's only one of us in the room.
So with that, Neil, why do you think now at the moment it's important for us, everyone who ever wants to maybe begin that dialogue for themselves, talking to God, listening to God?
Well, I don't make a judgment about what's important to other people, but I think it would be beneficial for all of us to open that line of communication with the divine, if you please, because it would change who we are fundamentally. That is, how we act, how we behave, how we interact with each other. We could never do to others what we have done to others on this planet if we thought we were all one.
Mm.
If I thought that, you and I were simply individuations of the same essential essence, and that we are really and truly family. It's not just a figure of speech, it's an actuality. We are all one. I said, I'm trying to understand how that could be true. We're separate from each other. And God said, Neil, hold up your hand. So I held up my hand. I said, okay. And God said, do you see fingers on your hand? I said, yeah. God said, are they identical? I said, no, they're not identical. Each one is separate. Each one is individual. And she said, each one is individual, but they are not separate. They are all part of the same hand. Is that not true? And I said, so I see the difference between individuality and separation. One does not equal the other. Things can be individual without being separate. And then God said to me, sweetheart, every sentient being in the cosmos, to use a metaphor, is a finger on the hand of God. When you understand that, you would no sooner hurt another human being in any way than you would take a knife and cut off your own finger.
Neil, it's very surreal hearing your voice say this when I've heard the audio version of your voice several times over for all these books, and yet hearing it live and being reminded and remembering these things, because it's not the first time I've heard this, but hearing it live in this space, it has a much bigger impact than I actually imagined it would be. And so I do thank you for that. It's it's wonderful and very surreal, and I hope we can capture that for the others who will be listening and watching this as well. Um, I'm I'm wondering as I hear all these things that it's quite the journey that you've been on, and I know that in previous interviews you've said that it's difficult to imagine even one facet of your life that hasn't changed as a result of going through this. But is there one area of your life where you've personally noticed maybe the biggest difference since going through this dialogue and opening up to this to this newfound philosophy?
Interesting question. I think the biggest difference is the level of my detachment. I am no longer attached to outcomes, to particular experiences, to what I once would have described as needs. I have found there's a huge difference between needs and desires. I haven't eliminated desires from my life, but I have eliminated needs. So I no longer consider that if I don't experience what I desire, that I'm going to be unhappy. I don't experience that anymore. When I was a younger person, I experienced that if I didn't get what I desired, I'd be unhappy. But I changed my whole approach to that human interactive experience. So yeah, that would be what I would say in response to your question.
Okay. because something, and if there's anyone on the planet at this time that could answer this for me, Neil, it would obviously be yourself. There's times, and also there's a story in God Talk that actually references this, and I've always had this. Maybe it's a personal insecurity and worry, which means that if I'm having it, I'm sure others have had it as well. That when you hear that word detachment and letting go, I think there's a story where a man starts to be overcome with the sense of love, but when he's with his family and friends, he says there isn't the same connection that there was before, but there is a deeper level of love. And a part of me noticed there was this feeling of fear or concern, or almost as if I would lose something in not having that the connection that I had, because there are some people where I just love all aspects of the connection that I have with them, and the idea of losing that in any way, even if it means a deeper love, there's this weird duality that I face, and I didn't know if there was something that you could say to jar me out of that, or to maybe allow me to open up a bit more.
Yes, you said is there's one person in the world who could answer the question. So with that kind of a platform, I would say no pressure.
Yes, yeah, my bad.
But I would say that the gentleman who made the comment may have used the wrong word. His vocabulary might have been limited.
Mm,
I don't think that we lose our connection when we fall into a deeper love. I think we lose our dependency,
mm,
and that's entirely different.
yes.
When I can love another person so deeply that I no longer depend on them to give me what I thought I needed from them in order to feel loved, then I have loved them purely. When I love another person because I think that maybe if I say the right thing or act in the right way or behave in the proper way, maybe I'll get some kind of a return on my investment, if you please. Then I'm not really loving them at all. I'm simply loving myself through them,
Mm,
simply using others as a means of receiving love. But when I get to a point where I realize, you know, I'm no longer dependent on another person's response or reaction. I'm not looking for a return on my investment. For instance, as an example, my beloved spouse, my wife. Scott, I love my life partner just as she is standing there alone by herself, giving me nothing at all. I love her simply because of who I observe that she is, the beauty and the wonder and the glory of her human being. And I don't mean just her physical beauty. She's a beautiful woman, but she's kind and compassionate, caring and understanding, and emotionally generous and patient beyond limits, and all the things that I would hope to see in another person. But and I see those gifts. I see the person that she is. My wife's the kind of person, if she sees a spider on the countertop in the kitchen, she'll work for 20 minutes to coax that spider into a little jar and get it outside and return it to its natural habitat.
mm,
She'll actually talk to the spider. Come on, sweetie. Come on, sweetie. Just get into the jar. I'll take you back out. There's nothing in here for you. The first time I saw her do that, which is years ago, I thought, could there be a more caring person in the world
mm,
who cares for every form of life? And so I fell in love with her all over again because I didn't get anything out of that. I wasn't served in any way by watching her save a spider.
mm,
But boy, was I ever expanded in my understanding of what true love is about, because pure love needs, expects, requires, and demands nothing in return,
mm.
which is how God loves us. So I loved my wife in that moment. I fell in love with her all over again. And I said to her when she came back in after carefully releasing that spider outdoors in the greenery outside. She said, "Okay, sweetie, you're home again." And she let the spider go. And she came in and I said to her, "I just fell in love with you all over again." She said, "Oh, what a sweet thing to say. Why? Why would you say that?" And I said, "Because, sweetheart, I realized who you are at the core of your being, and it has nothing to do with what I can get out of it."
Yeah.
So that's been a huge expansion of my awareness of what pure love is really all about.
Yes. Do you think with everything that you've gone through, and almost circles back to the idea of God saying, can you think of a better way to live than what we've just been saying? Is there, has there ever been anything, or do you think there could be anything at this point that could maybe make you doubt the existence of God or doubt
No,
the,
no,
not at all?
no. There was a time when I would have said yes, and what that would have been was the the beauty and the wonder of the messages that I was receiving. All that I've been sharing with you here
Yes.
this is not Neil's wisdom. This all came to me in conversations with God, and the feelings that I'm expressing here with you, including how I felt when my wife saved a spider. I'm going to write a book one day called "Save the Spider." Really, because it just captures the essence of what true pure love is about. But
Yes.
there was a time when I would have answered your last question with a yes. I would have said yes. There was a time when I doubted that I'm really hearing all of this from the God of the universe. Why? Because it was too good to be true. It was too good to be true that God doesn't judge, doesn't condemn, doesn't punish anybody for anything. There's no such place as hell. There are no rules that we have to somehow obey. There are no commandments that we have to, obey. God needs and wants nothing from us. It's God's greatest joy simply to give God's love to us and give us the free will to do with that love as we wish,
Mm.
and to allow every species of sentient beings in the cosmos to evolve in the way that they will. And so I would have doubted that. And I did doubt it for the first year or two. I thought every so often I would think, God, I can't believe this is almost too good to be true. And I finally said that to God. I said, God, the stuff you're telling me, it almost sounds too good to be true. And God said to me, Neil, if God can't be too good to be true, who can?
Um, and listening to that, Neil, I know that with the audience that we're going to have as well, that there's going to be a portion of people who everything you say, they were on board before you even said it. There's going to be obviously a portion of people who aren't willing to hear the message yet. And yet there's going to be people who are just going to be on the fence, who are going to be wanting to tip their toe over the other side of the fence into maybe this wonderful new world that has always been available. If you could say anything to those people to maybe give them the permission to dabble, to stick more than a toe or more than a finger over the fence, what do you think? What do you think that would be?
Try it. Try living this way. Try moving through your life where you expect and require and demand nothing from anyone, where you never again will punish anyone, even in the smallest way, even by giving somebody the silent treatment or in some other way, punishing them. Uh, Move through 1 week of your life where you never seek retribution from another, never seek to punish another, never even feel you have to forgive another. You know what I say to people? I love it when I'm invited to talk at a church. Every so often, the church has the courage to actually invite me to give a little talk.
Yes.
And I'll go to the church and I'll say, I've come here to tell you that God will never forgive you for anything. And people's eyes cross. I mean, they don't know what to do with that information. Some people actually get up and leave the room. Oh, one of these new age guys, and they walk out of the room. But those who have the courage to stay and hear me out, I say to them, God will never forgive you for anything because you cannot hurt, damage, upset, anger, frustrate, or annoy God in any way. Because, as I said earlier, because God needs and requires nothing from you in order to be happy. Because God loves you purely without needing anything back from you in return. Not your worship, not your obedience, not anything at all. Any more than you need worship or obedience from a 16-month-old child, for goodness sake. Because we are children in God's eyes. And God understands how we could behave the way we're behaving, given our limited awareness of who we really are.
Mm.
If Grandpa is at the kitchen table and it's his daughter's seventh birthday, or his granddaughter's seventh birthday, and Mommy brings the chocolate cake out and pours the glass of milk, and the little girl goes, "Oh, Mommy, chocolate cake, my favorite cake! Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy!" And she reaches for the chocolate cake and she knocks over the glass of milk. Now there's milk all over the table and all over Grandpa's new suit. And he looks at the child and he says, "It's okay, sweetheart. Grandpa forgives you." Of course not. Because Grandpa understands that forgiveness is not even part of the equation. In fact, not only does Grandpa not forgive the child, Grandpa actually comforts the child in the moment of her dismay. Because Grandpa understands how a child could do such a thing. Therefore, find a magic marker and write on your bathroom mirror so that you never forget it and see it every morning when you wake up. Write this on your bathroom mirror. Understanding replaces forgiveness in the mind of the master. What do I say to a person? Try it for a week. Try living this way for a week, where you need, want, require, demand nothing, expect, even hope for nothing in return from anybody. And where you never forgive anybody else ever again, not even yourself, where you don't even forgive yourself for things you wish you hadn't done. Because understanding replaces forgiveness in the mind of the master. That doesn't mean you condone it. It doesn't mean you agree with it. It doesn't mean you want the behavior to be repeated, but it does mean, I understand. Live that way for a week and then tell me that this material doesn't work.
Yes. That's a wonderful piece of advice. Neil, I'm very conscious of your time. Are there any, I suppose, two last questions? One, of all the years you've been doing this, is there a question that you really hoped, oh, it'd be lovely if they asked that, and no one ever seems to?
No, I've been asked just about every question I could be asked. So no one has ever, there's no question that I'm waiting for someone to ask me.
Okay. What?
Except maybe perhaps, how much money can we pay you for this interview?
I'm afraid that won't be coming out.
Your audience would be astonished to know the thousands and thousands of dollars I've required to be on your podcast for an hour. So let's not tell them.
No, let's keep it between us. So with that, Neil, any last words from God that we can share before we wrap up?
Yes. Raise not your fist to heaven, and curse the darkness not, but be a light unto the darkness, that you might know who you really are, and that all those whose lives you touch might know who they really are as well. Try
Beautiful.
it for a
Try it
week.
for a week. See what happens. Neil, this has been so fun. I've genuinely enjoyed every second. So thank you again. Where can people find God Talk?
I presume at any online bookstore, I would imagine.
Okay. So you heard that, people. Stop being lazy gits. Go search for it. You'll find it.
Yeah, the book is it's kind of a one-word title, unusual title, Godtalk, as written as one word. It's all about God talk. So if they search for the book God Talk, they should find it at most online bookstores.
Yeah. And then if people have been inspired by a conversation today, shocked, distraught, they've had their reality shaken, where can they find out more about you?
They can go to cwgconnect.com. CWG, of course, stands for Conversations with God. So anyone who wants to stay connected with the energy, simply go to cwgconnect.com, or they could do something easier than that if they want to. Just go to my Facebook page. Just go to Facebook and type in Neale Donald Walsch.
Fantastic. Neil, it's been a real privilege today. Thank you ever so much for coming on.